Our International Relations and Cooperation Minister, Dr. Naledi Pandor, has spoken tough against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, calling for the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant for him. Pandor accuses Netanyahu of violating international laws by murdering innocent children, including women in Gaza. International Relations Director General is Zane, who joins me now for context on what the minister told Parliament yesterday. Director General, thank you very much for your time. Can I begin with this question about how you would characterize South Africa's relations with Israel right now? Or is there no relationship to talk of right now?
I think the relationship has been strained for a while because of the ongoing violence associated with the occupation. As you know, that before this, we had downgraded our diplomatic relations in Tel Aviv, particularly because of the continued occupation, the violence associated with the occupation, and a reluctance to engage meaningfully on negotiations towards a just peace in the area. So our relationship has been strained, and I think with the current onslaught in Gaza, it's deteriorated significantly. As you know, the scope for engagement has just been narrowed significantly.
Yeah. So what does this mean then for relations between South Africa? There are those who seem to suggest that these relations have been severed. Is that, in fact, where we are at this moment?
Well, they have not been completely severed. I think we always hold out the opportunity for engagement and negotiations. We will be, as instructed by Cabinet, recalling our diplomats from Tel Aviv. We're not closing that office, but we're recalling our diplomats. If there's a change, if there's a movement and a signal towards genuinely wanting to end the onslaught in Gaza, an immediate ceasefire, and signaling the intent to engage with all stakeholders around a just peace, then we will play our role in ensuring that we will play a meaningful role in bringing together all the antagonists in this war.
The withdrawal of South Africa's diplomats from Tel Aviv, that was announced sometime earlier in the week. Do we know whether they are in South Africa right now, and what have they told you about the situation on the ground?
So the announcement came 2 days ago in Cabinet, so we have instructed all of them to come back. They should be coming back over the next couple of days. Of course, they will probably have to go through Jordan, as the travel out of Israel is a bit difficult at this moment, but they've been instructed to come back. As soon as they get back, we will be engaging with them. But of course, we've also been engaging with both our representative in Ramallah and in Tel Aviv, and they've been giving us updates on what's happening on the ground from what they can ascertain. And it's as bad as it's being, it's bad. I think the kind of evidence that you're getting from sources such as Al Jazeera, from the health ministry in Gaza, from other sources that are coming from international media is accurate. The death toll is significant. And I can't even use the word indiscriminate. I think that there's deliberate targeting of civilians at this stage. Hospitals, schools. I think the Secretary General indicated that 80 UNRWA staff members have been killed, which is the largest amount of UN staff members killed in any conflict since the UN was founded in 1948, which is a significant statistic. I think I watched your interview last night as well, and you yourself raised the issue that the number of children killed in this month exceeds the number of children killed in conflicts on an annual basis over the last 5 years. It's significant.
Yeah. DG, in fact, I'm going to latch on to exactly what you have just referred to, which was that interview I had with the Jewish Board of Deputies. And I'll be keen to know, because language becomes very important in diplomatic matters. Pretoria, what is your characterization of what is unfolding in Gaza? The word genocide has been used. Is that now the official language that the South African government, at least, is using to characterize the situation there?
So when we use the word genocide, it's not just a label. If you look at the technical definition of genocide, both under the Genocide Convention and also in terms of how it's treated at the ICC, what is happening now is definitely, genocidal. The intent to genocide has been demonstrated by the utterances of senior Israeli officials, from the Prime Minister to the Defense Minister and other ministers. And that intent towards genocide is what the crime of genocide turns on. If you signal the intent to kill a group of people in part or in whole, and you even kill 5 people, but the intent is been articulated as being genocidal, then the crime of genocide needs to be investigated. And we can see by the gravity of the crimes, the gravity of the number of children being killed, women, non-combatants, that this, the characterization of genocide is not just an allegation. We're saying it's a reality and must be investigated.
Let's then link directly from what we are discussing, which is what you are saying as Praetorian, that is that genocide is being conducted in Gaza by Israeli forces. Let me latch on to what the minister said in Parliament, and to quote her directly, she said, Mr. Netanyahu is responsible for violations of international criminal law, and therefore she went on to say she would wish for the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant for not only Mr. Netanyahu, but his top officials. Is this something that South Africa would want to take a lead on at the ICC? Would you be keen to go and lay a charge at the International Criminal Court against Mr. Netanyahu's government?
There's already an ongoing investigation for all the crimes under the jurisdiction of the ICC. Since 2014, since the state of Palestine put themselves under the jurisdiction of the ICC. What we are concerned about is that investigation has been slow, and given the current, breaches of international law and all of the crimes, with the exception of the crime of aggression being breached in the current situation, we think we need to speed up that investigation. So the current investigation is a self-referral from the Palestinian Authority. And we think there's merit in state parties who are concerned about what is happening to register through an Article 14 submission our support for this investigation to be sped up. And we hope that other state parties will also do the same, so that the prosecutor acknowledges that this is a serious issue and needs to be taken seriously. So, the investigation is ongoing. What we will be doing is just to ensure that the prosecutor understands that there's an urgency for this investigation to commence.
You're talking about the ICC prosecutor. He himself has been in the Middle East. He has seen what is happening there. If the state parties, as you mentioned them, were to then coalesce and come together and ultimately do lay a charge against Mr. Netanyahu and his government officials, how quickly would that process flow? When would we likely know whether or not Benjamin Netanyahu now faces crimes against humanity, if you like?
Yeah. So let me say again, the ICC is already investigating this, and under the ICC, who gets investigated are those who are most responsible. Most responsible means those who give the commands. So it's command responsibility and superior responsibility. In most cases, this would be your head of your armed forces, and in this case also your prime minister and any other leading officials who would have given firstly the instruction to do this. Secondly, failure to stop the atrocities is also a crime and needs to be investigated. So under the current investigation and under the sort of laws of the ICC itself, command responsibility and superior responsibility, it is inevitable that Mr. Netanyahu, some of his cabinet members and some of his senior generals would need to be investigated for these crimes. So our intent is to ensure that this investigation is sped up. Since 2014, in terms of previous attacks, it has been slow. This has by far been the worst over the last 50 years. So we would want to signal that this investigation must proceed with haste now.
Just to be clear, DG, or perhaps a point of clarity, so that the viewers are aware, is Israel a signatory to the ICC? And if not, how then does the process work of indicting a government that is not a party to the treaty?
So Israel is not a state party, but the Palestinian Authority is a state party. So the territories of the Palestine provides what is called territorial jurisdiction for the ICC. And it also means that any atrocities committed on the territory of Palestine, including Gaza or the West Bank, any of the occupied territories, provides the ICC with territorial jurisdiction. This means that even though Israel is not a state party, but because they have perpetrated the crimes on the territory of a state party, they can be investigated. Similarly, because Hamas is part of the state territory of Palestine, anything that they committed from a war crimes perspective on the territory of Israel, even though Israel is not a state party, can also be investigated.
Very interesting indeed. Those listening, Director General, will say that, but this interview has been one-sided. We're forgetting that Israel did suffer 1,400 lives. This was on the 7th, whose anniversary was yesterday, and therefore they will possibly counter this and say, ICC, you want to indict us? Well, please do look at what Hamas did on the 7th of October. Would you anticipate something of that nature? And by the way, they do say that the brutality of the attacks on October 7 would most likely be at the same scale as what they are being accused of.
So I think that the gravity issue will always have to be taken into account, and gravity is one of the issues that prosecutors of the ICC will take into account. We would welcome any investigation of war crimes by Hamas. We use the word war crimes very specifically because it's a crime under the jurisdiction of the ICC. That, given the fact that there's an active occupation, means there's an active conflict, which means that the wars of conflict, the laws of conflict apply. And the ICC would then have to investigate whatever crimes the Hamas has committed. Our view is that any attack on civilians and non-combatants should be investigated, and we condemn that. We don't, October 7th was a particular day, and the horrors of that day is something that we speak about. But like Daniel Levy, a former key Israeli negotiator, stated on many platforms, is that there's a context to this, that the occupation began in 1948, and even before that, if one takes the Balfour Declaration, this possession began many decades ago. So this conflict did not begin on October the 7th. It may have escalated since October the 7th. That 1,400 is a number that is significant, and it's too much. And we need to investigate that completely and call for that investigation. But similarly, I think if one looks at the scale of the deaths in Gaza, the fact that you've got 40% of the over 10,000 civilians being killed, being children, this needs to be investigated. And the emphasis in this investigation should be there because the gravity is much worse.
Yeah.
I think one of the issues we must make a distinction of, and there's a civilizational discourse emerging, is that those who kill with the sword are seen as savages, and those who kill from a distance and obliterate people through missiles and targeted airstrikes are seen as being civilized. We don't see that. We see all of those who kill civilians, irrespective of the method in which they do that, as being significant war criminals and need to be investigated.
Wow, this is quite enlightening. As we wind down this conversation, Director General, the Minister also touching on the reform of the global governance system. And I'm going to be specific here and ask you whether she is talking about the reform of not just the United Nations Security Council, but I would want to venture and say the ICC itself, seeing that that is what is on the lips right now. And the reason I'm raising this is that Israel has the unequivocal support of a very powerful government in the world, and that is the United States. The ICC prosecutor has been questioned, or criticized rather, for cherry-picking on the cases that the ICC chooses to pursue. So I want to marry these two, that the Israeli government has the support of a powerful government in the form of the United States. When you marry this and you say, ICC prosecutor, please look into this, speed up the investigations, as you've been saying, but ultimately we want to see Benjamin Netanyahu charged with crimes against humanity. Do you foresee a challenge here?
I think the ICC has an opportunity now to demonstrate that the cynics who say that they are being used for geopolitical purposes are wrong. I think if they demonstrate that they will investigate all situations equally and with the same vigor, then the ICC's position in international legal, the international framework for dealing with international crime will be strengthened. If they miss this opportunity, the sort of criticism that the ICC is being instrumentalized for geopolitical purposes will be strengthened. So clearly we are making a call to the ICC. We've decided to remain a state party because we believe in the institutions like the ICC that deal with impunity. They must actually come to the fore now and actually ensure that they apply international justice equally. We know that the US, for example, put significant pressure on South Africa to respect our domestic and international law when it came to the arrest warrant for Putin, and we complied with that. We made sure that we respect our domestic and international legal obligations. We will call on the US and others to ensure that they too, even though they are not state parties, respect international law, and in this case, ensure that there's no undue pressure put on the ICC not to investigate. We've seen this happen in the past. We've seen threats made to visas of judges of the ICC, the visas to the US being revoked because of investigations in Afghanistan. We've seen before, encouraging Palestine, for example, not to put themselves under the jurisdiction of the ICC before 2014, precisely because they wanted to avoid a situation where Israel could be walled before the court in The Hague. So I think what we will be doing is asking these countries to adhere to the principles they espouse to, and that is for international law to be applied equally without fear of favor.
Two quick questions as we conclude our conversations, DG. First one, the Israeli ambassador to South Africa, has he been summoned to Pretoria, or to use the diplomatic language, has he been demarched yet? And if so, do you intend to do that? What is the ultimate goal? Because you've now withdrawn your diplomat from Tel Aviv.
So we will follow the cabinet instruction and we will demarch the ambassador, because I think there's merit in cabinet's calling for us to demarch the ambassador, given the kinds of statements that he's been making, and I think the minister and others had already articulated what those are. But we'll also take this opportunity to speak to him about just the scale of atrocities that's taking place in Gaza, and ask for an immediate ceasefire, and also ask for humanitarian corridors to be opened. We will use the opportunity and at this diplomatic channel to ask for compliance with international law and international humanitarian law as a matter of urgency.
Finally, let's talk about the trade relations between South Africa and Israel. When you quantify the figure of trade between these two countries, I was talking to an ANC official yesterday who said, who bandied about a figure of $250 million US, and he said, look, that's small change. It's something that we willing to forgo given the scale of what is going on in Gaza. Where are discussions in relation to whether South Africa is at that stage of actually even cutting trade relations?
Look, we haven't as a government decided on economic sanctions or cultural boycott or any of those things at an official level. But I think the kind of discourse that's emerging, for example, of Israel contravening the suppression of the crime of apartheid as well, means that becomes another international wrongful act. And given the fact that it is an international wrongful act, it actually, there's a positive duty on states then that are party to the UN, because it's this international wrongful acts isn't sort of governed by any specific treaty. All of us will then have a duty to decide what we do as a countermeasure against that international wrongful act. So, whether deliberations of Israel contravening the crime of apartheid taking, escalating even towards perhaps a discussion or resolution on this on the UN, we will then have to regroup as government and decide what do we do. And then the economic sanctions would have to come into play, not just as South Africa, but all other states would be obliged to do that, just as they were with South Africa when South Africa, the crime against the suppression of apartheid emerged because of the crime of apartheid in South Africa and also Namibia. And there was a positive duty on states to act, and non-violent means such as disinvestment is a legitimate strategy under those circumstances. But as government, we have not yet engaged with that. What we will be looking at is allegations on social media that South Africa may have sold arms to Israel. Again, in terms of under our legislation, we cannot sell arms to any country in conflict, so we'll be looking at the veracity of that over the next couple of days.
Zane Dangor, thank you very much for your time, sir, Director General at Dirco.